The conflict in Gaza is deeply rooted in history. To understand the present, we must journey back to the late 19th century. At this time, a movement called Zionism emerged among European Jews. Zionists sought to establish a Jewish state in Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire. This land held deep religious significance for Jews. However, it was also home to a large Arab population, predominantly Muslim. The arrival of Zionist settlers triggered tensions with the local Arab community. Both groups laid claim to the same land. This clash of aspirations sowed the seeds of conflict. As more Jews immigrated to Palestine, encouraged by the Zionist movement, the situation grew increasingly volatile. The Ottoman Empire, weakened by internal strife, struggled to maintain order. By the early 20th century, Palestine had become a land of simmering unrest. The competing claims of Jews and Arabs created a powder keg. The stage was set for a conflict that would have far-reaching and tragic consequences. External forces would soon further complicate the situation. The Ottoman Empire's involvement in World War I would prove to be a turning point. In 1917, the British government issued a document that would have profound implications for the future of Palestine and the Middle East. This document, known as the Balfour Declaration, expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The declaration was a watershed moment. It gave international legitimacy to Zionist aspirations. However, it also sowed the seeds of future conflict. The Balfour Declaration failed to adequately address the concerns of the Palestinian Arabs. While it called for safeguarding the civil and religious rights of non-Jewish communities in Palestine, it did not guarantee their political or national rights. This omission would have far-reaching consequences. The declaration fueled Arab fears of being displaced from their homeland. The aftermath of World War I saw the Ottoman Empire collapse. Palestine came under British control as a Mandate territory. The British faced the daunting task of balancing the aspirations of Jews and Arabs. However, tensions continued to simmer. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, further alarming the Arab population. The Balfour Declaration, intended to resolve the issue of a Jewish homeland, instead exacerbated tensions. It set the stage for a struggle for control of Palestine that would culminate in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. This war would have a profound and lasting impact on the region and the lives of millions. The year 1948 witnessed a cataclysmic event that would forever shape the landscape of the Middle East: the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. This war, which followed the end of the British Mandate for Palestine, pitted the newly declared State of Israel against neighboring Arab states. It resulted in a decisive Israeli victory. However, this victory came at a heavy cost, particularly for the Palestinian people. The war triggered a mass exodus of Palestinians from their homes. This exodus, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, saw over 700,000 Palestinians displaced. They fled to neighboring countries, including Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, seeking refuge. Many ended up in overcrowded refugee camps, where they and their descendants would live for generations to come. The 1948 war had a profound impact on Palestinian identity. The loss of their homeland and the displacement of so many people created a deep sense of dispossession and trauma. It also fueled a desire for return and self-determination. The Palestinian refugee issue would become a major stumbling block in future peace negotiations. The war also led to the division of Jerusalem, a city sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Israel captured West Jerusalem, while East Jerusalem, including the Old City and its holy sites, came under Jordanian control. The status of Jerusalem would remain a highly sensitive issue. The 1948 war had a profound impact on Gaza. The small coastal strip, densely populated with Palestinian refugees, came under Egyptian administration. However, it remained cut off from the West Bank, which was annexed by Jordan. The war had a devastating impact on Gaza's economy. Its citrus industry, once a major source of income, was decimated. In 1967, Israel occupied Gaza along with the West Bank and East Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. This occupation marked the beginning of a new chapter in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Israel's control over Gaza brought about significant changes. Settlements were established, land was confiscated, and movement was restricted. The occupation had a profound impact on the lives of Palestinians in Gaza. They faced restrictions on their movement, economic opportunities, and political rights. This fueled resentment and resistance. Palestinian political factions emerged, advocating for an end to the occupation and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. The First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising that began in 1987, was a turning point. It demonstrated the depth of Palestinian anger and frustration with the occupation. The Intifada also brought the Palestinian issue to the forefront of international attention. It paved the way for the Oslo Accords, a series of agreements signed in the 1990s that aimed to resolve the conflict. The Oslo Accords, while a significant development, failed to deliver a lasting peace. The Accords were intended to be a stepping stone towards a two-state solution. However, they were plagued by setbacks and a lack of trust between the parties. The continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, including Gaza, fueled Palestinian frustration. In this climate of disillusionment and anger, a new force emerged in Palestinian politics, Hamas. Founded in 1987, Hamas rejected the Oslo Accords and called for the liberation of all of Palestine from Israeli rule. Hamas gained popularity in Gaza, particularly among those disillusioned with the peace process and the Palestinian Authority's inability to improve their lives. Hamas's rise coincided with a period of escalating violence. The Second Intifada, which erupted in 2000, was marked by suicide bombings and Israeli military incursions. Gaza became a major battleground. The Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, while hailed by some as a step towards peace, did not end the cycle of violence. Hamas's takeover of Gaza in 2007, following a brief but bloody civil war with Fatah, the dominant faction in the Palestinian Authority, further complicated the situation. Israel imposed a blockade on Gaza, citing security concerns. This blockade, which restricted the movement of people and goods, had a devastating impact on Gaza's economy and humanitarian situation. Gaza today is a land scarred by conflict and humanitarian crisis. The densely populated Strip, home to over 2 million Palestinians, has been subjected to repeated Israeli military operations. These operations, launched in response to rocket fire from Gaza into Israel, have resulted in widespread destruction and a heavy toll on civilians. The Israeli blockade, in place for over a decade, has exacerbated the humanitarian crisis. It has crippled Gaza's economy, leaving its population mired in poverty. The blockade has also severely restricted access to essential goods, including food, medicine, and fuel. This has had a devastating impact on the health and well-being of Gaza's residents. The United Nations has described the humanitarian situation in Gaza as dire. The unemployment rate is among the highest in the world. The healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. The water supply is contaminated. And the population, particularly children, suffers from high rates of malnutrition and trauma. The repeated cycles of violence and the ongoing blockade have created a sense of despair and hopelessness among many in Gaza. The international community has condemned the humanitarian situation. However, efforts to lift the blockade and find a lasting solution to the conflict have been met with limited success. The conflict in Gaza has elicited strong reactions from the international community. However, there is no consensus on how to resolve the crisis. This lack of unity has hampered efforts to find a peaceful and lasting solution. The international community is divided along several lines. Some countries, particularly Western nations, are staunch allies of Israel. They view Israel as a democratic state facing an existential threat from terrorist groups like Hamas. These countries often emphasize Israel's right to defend itself against rocket attacks. They also express concern about Hamas's human rights record and its refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist. Other countries, particularly in the Arab and Muslim world, are more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. They view Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories as illegal and the root cause of the conflict. These countries often condemn Israel's use of force against Palestinian civilians. They also call for an end to the blockade of Gaza and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. This division within the international community is reflected in the United Nations. Resolutions condemning Israel's actions often face vetoes from the United States, a permanent member of the Security Council. This has led to accusations of bias and a lack of even-handedness in addressing the conflict. The question of how to achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians is one that has vexed diplomats and world leaders for decades. The two-state solution, long seen as the most viable path to peace, has faced numerous setbacks. It remains elusive, but is it still achievable? The two-state solution envisions an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. This state would encompass the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. However, the continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the status of Jerusalem, and the issue of Palestinian refugees pose significant obstacles. Critics of the two-state solution argue that it is no longer viable. They point to the growth of settlements, making a contiguous Palestinian state increasingly difficult to achieve. Some advocate for a one-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians would live together in a single democratic state. However, this proposal faces its own challenges. It would require a fundamental shift in the political landscape and a willingness to compromise on both sides. The deep mistrust and animosity between Israelis and Palestinians, fueled by decades of conflict, make any solution difficult to achieve. Despite the challenges, the pursuit of peace remains paramount. The human cost of the conflict, particularly in Gaza, is simply too high. Finding a way to break the cycle of violence and create a more hopeful future for both Israelis and Palestinians is essential. Dialogue, while difficult and often fraught with tension, is crucial. It is through open and honest communication that misunderstandings can be addressed and common ground can be found. Confidence-building measures are also essential. Small steps, such as easing the blockade on Gaza and halting settlement expansion, can help to create a more conducive environment for negotiations. International mediation is also critical. Neutral parties, such as the United Nations or regional powers, can play a vital role in facilitating dialogue and mediating disputes. The international community must also provide economic assistance to rebuild Gaza and support the Palestinian Authority in governing the West Bank. A just and lasting peace requires addressing the root causes of the conflict. This includes finding a solution to the Palestinian refugee issue, resolving the status of Jerusalem, and ensuring security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Ultimately, peace will require a fundamental shift in attitudes and a willingness to compromise on both sides. The conflict in Gaza is not just a political dispute, it is a human tragedy. Behind the headlines and the political rhetoric are real people whose lives have been shattered by violence, loss, and displacement. It is easy to become desensitized to the suffering, but we must never forget the human cost of this conflict. We must remember the children of Gaza who have known nothing but war and blockade. We must remember the families torn apart by violence and displacement. We must remember the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Their stories are a stark reminder of the urgency of peace. The international community has a moral obligation to act. We must demand an end to the violence, an end to the blockade, and an end to the suffering. We must support efforts to rebuild Gaza and provide humanitarian assistance to those in need. We must also hold all parties accountable for their actions and ensure that human rights are respected. The road to peace will be long and arduous, but we must never give up hope. We must continue to work towards a future where Israelis and Palestinians can live together in peace, security, and dignity. The alternative is simply unacceptable.